And now, Desmond Dossa is often seen on television screens and newspapers leading the charge against giant oil, gas corporations, and fracking endeavors. His tireless work to defend the rights of the poor communities most affected by environmental injustices has earned him the Goldman Environmental Prize for Outstanding Environmental Achievement in Africa. He joins us now remotely from Durban. Welcome, Desmond. Now, you are a strong voice of impoverished communities across Durban. How did growing up in that region of South Africa influence your passion for the environment?
Well, thank you so much, and welcome to the viewers all around the world. Yes, my childhood was informed by high levels of toxic pollution, living in the shadow of the biggest petrochemical industry in Africa and in the Southern Hemisphere, as well as major big paper mills, two of the biggest refineries in South Africa based in Durban. So living with that and experiencing firsthand the chronic health impacts that were affected onto my family, but also the neighbors that I lived alongside. So at a very early age, kids in the area where I lived had chronic asthma, and some of them had leukemia and cancer.
What types of environmentally hazardous companies were located in that area, and how close do people live to them?
Well, you know, the most toxic chemical and petrochemical industries are in the neighborhood where I live. I basically walk out a minute out of I can watch it from my balcony, and it's in my window. It's about a minute away from where I live. We are surrounded with over 300 of the class 1 chemicals that are there, that are manufactured. The crude oil comes in from all parts of the world to Durban, and then all the products are stored that are coming from other parts of the world in Durban, where we call it, where you got class 1 chemicals that are stored there and manufactured, and then you have the secondary industries, and that then traverses on our roads and through pipelines underneath our roads, either through being exported through the rest of Africa or to other parts of the world, or used in the context of South Africa.
Desmond, what do you remember of being a child in the area, playing outside, and what was the air quality like?
Well, it was very noxious, you know. The air quality was very smelly, and it infected our respiratory organs. So we were always, you know, noxious and bringing up all that stuff. So we ate during the day and had lunch or supper in the evening with our parents and siblings. We would not be able to complete a full meal because of the odious smell coming from these toxic chemicals that were emitted. And during that period, when I was growing up as a child, sulfur dioxide was 80 tons a day. That was released from the chemical industry that surround our homes. We on the fence line have been living there for over 40 years now. We were previously living in clean environments, and we were forcibly removed during the apartheid era of 1966 to be buffer zones for the industry. And we were to provide cheap labor to the chemical industry, and that resulted in us not knowing about the chemicals initially. But as the years went on and we started to get affected, and our parents would sit up late at night, wiping down the temperatures that we were going through and rushing us to hospitals, it was clear to me then that there was something wrong in our neighborhood. But obviously we didn't have the evidence at hand. Today, through the effort that we have put together, able to take our own air samples, able to interrogate the data coming through from the air quality monitoring stations, we understand now that the dangers and what caused it. It took us over 30 years of learning about it. It also took us to having the evidence, building up the data, understanding what the evidence was showing, and then projecting the evidence that we had gathered, all that data, into the health impacts and understanding what was causing our health impacts. So today, after 2 health studies, we now know that the air pollution in our neighborhood is toxic. It causes high levels of asthma, chronic asthma, which is respiratory diseases, as well as it's got the cancer risk of, the norm is 1 in 100,000. We have over 25 in 100,000 people who have cancer in the area. So it's why we call it Cancer Alley. And the levels of the pollutants that are coming out, whether it's CO2, carbon monoxide, or whether it's other nasty chemicals such as HFO, or hydrofluoric acid, or any of the acrylides. We now know it, and we know that the levels are quite unacceptable. The benzene levels are the most toxic, that are directly related to the carcinogenic, that causes carcinogenic. Those levels are still high. We don't have the same normal standards of benzene as other European countries or in the US. We don't have a standard of benzene, which is volatile organic compounds in South Africa. And that is hugely problematic. Hence the high levels of cancer and leukemia, which is cancer of the blood in children.
Desmond, this area has been called Cancer Valley, which is due to the incidence of cancer and, like you said, asthma, other diseases in this area. Well, but what role does the government play in allowing this type of thing to go on? And have you seen a shift in their position over the years? I guess what I'm saying is, do you see progress in moving away from dirty fossil fuels and to cleaner, renewable sources of energy?
Well, I must say that the democratic government of Nelson Mandela that came to power in 1994 developed the most progressive environmental legislation seen anywhere in the world, with progressive rights in the Bill of Rights, as well as all the pieces and pieces of legislation, such as the National Environmental Management Act, which is a framework for progressive environmental legislation in the country, including the most progressive Air Quality Act we ever have. The problem since then, we have regressed, and this started after the early 2000s, after the Air Quality Act was passed, and communities started were getting empowered with the knowledge that was produced by the Nelson Mandela government through the many monitoring stations, and through very importantly, we had access to information. But since then, government has regressed, and although we have the laws, we have seen the weakening of some laws to allow more development to happen and bad development. And so the oversight role of society in South Africa has dwindled, and the spaces for civil society has closed down. So as much as our government is meeting at the International Forum, and this week they are meeting in Poland, we don't believe that our government is going to change and remove and stop the complete development of the fossil fuel industry. We think there has to be a just transition. We hope government is listening to us. We think that we know that renewable energy is the answer to many societies. Not only does it create more jobs, but also we have a clean and healthy environment, and people will lead healthy lives. That's very critical and very important. Just this week, I have been traversing the last few months on the entire coastline to the mining communities that are losing their land, losing their culture, and losing their burial grounds where their dead are being buried, all because of mining, coal mining, and other source of mining. And we've seen the last 2 years that the oil and gas companies have come out in mass. The likes of Sasol, which is a state oil corporation, the biggest CO2 emitter in the continent and probably in the world, as well as the Italian oil corporation, ExxonMobil, and other oil corporations from Texas, are on our Indian Ocean. And the last few months, we've seen through the seismic testing how mammals have been affected. The whales are washing up dead on our coastline, including the dolphins and the planktons. And we are worried that our government is saying that they are committed. The government of South Africa says they are committed to the Paris Accord. But on the other hand, they are moving in the wrong direction by continuing to allow more coal-fired power stations to be developed, but also more coal mines to be developed in sensitive areas. And the latest we've seen is the oil and gas, as well as fracking, which they are proposing is the solution to climate change. We certainly know that fracking ain't no solution to climate change, and that the development of the oil and gas as well as mining is going to exacerbate the climate crisis that each and every one of us all over the world that are experiencing and have been affected by it. And in South Africa and in the province where I live, in KwaZulu-Natal, the water crisis, we are seeing the rivers drying up and it's getting worse. And so we need to move away from fossil fuel. We need to have a huge program to develop around renewable energy where we can create millions of jobs, and we can create it in the townships where people are unemployed. We need jobs, we need sustainable jobs, but we certainly do not need any jobs that are linked to the fossil fuel, such as oil, such as gas, such as coal and fracking.
Desmond, sounds like a lot of challenges facing you in South Africa. I want to thank you so much for leading the activism there in South Africa, and thank you for joining us on 24 Hours of Reality.